Gents, we've gotten the band back together, the Binks and Kendall Road Tour. I don't know if you've got T-shirts made up, Monterey 2019. The fact that we have the two of you back together with the vehicle that started this lifelong friendship, this glorious red, white, and blue Malibu Grand Prix sponsored Mazda RX-7, Tommy, that you used in IMSA in GTU to build your name, that captured the attention of so many manufacturers. How did we get here to this car coming back here with your original crew chief as well?
Well, I mean, I ended up with the car shortly after I drove it. My dad bought it from Clayton Cunningham and loaned it back to him, even though when I left the team. And then when I graduated from UCLA, my dad gave me the car, and it's just been stashed. And so I didn't really have any interest in the vintage stuff for a long time. But slowly, when you get a little older, you start slowing down, and you're like, that looks like fun. And then when I had to move all the cars out of where they were, I called Binks and said, I got a problem. He said, I can send anything you want here. And he, as soon as he gets them, he kind of assesses them. He just can't, not do anything. And so kind of assessed them with an eye towards eventually running them. And it's a slow process because the sponsor, namely me, is a little unreliable. Every time he'd call me, he'd say, I found a gearbox. And I'd say, how much? He'd say, $7,500. I'm like, oh, can we wait for another one? He says, there won't be another one. I said, okay. And so it was as much as I could afford. And then when this was announced that this was going to be IMSA, we kind of marked this on the calendar, so we got to make sure the car's together. And it probably still wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for John Doonan. John Doonan stepped up, both personally and professionally. Professionally, it made sense for Mazda, but personally, it was one of the cars that got him interested.
He's the best.
So, it's a hugely significant car even before I drove it. So, anyways, that's how it got here, and that's also how Danny and I met.
Dan, your son Phil is sitting off camera here, and I'm just trying to think if Tommy's dad is giving him an IMSA GTU car for graduation. Should I ask what? That's a heck of a gift. How do you match that? What did Phil get?
Phil has a pretty good hot rod. He's got a 800 horsepower S10.
Okay.
And I think it was way more than $15,000 that your dad paid for that RX-7. I think the engine was $15,000. I probably shouldn't have said that. My wife will find out now.
So most folks today see you and immediately think of the color yellow and a V8 that destroys Richter scales. For those who didn't know, the fact that actually your first really grounding, getting to become the crew chief that we know, dealing with what I think we call it a 1.3 liter twin rotor 13B, little spinny, tinny thing. You want to talk about visuals that don't match what we expect today with you at Corvette Racing, but tell folks about this opportunity, because not everyone gets to learn their craft working at the very top of the sport.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I grew up, my dad raced cars, and I worked on bug-eyed Sprites and Fiats, and the RX-7 really wasn't too much out of the norm for myself. And one thing that's fairly amazing, at the age of 22, I was the crew chief, and nowadays that would never ever happen. But I had worked on my dad's car since I was a child. I remember him putting me in front of the seat because I couldn't push on the brake pedal to help him bleed the brakes. It was just, that's what we did. Every night when he got home from work, we had dinner and we went and worked on the race car, and that was from about 8 years old till I moved out to work for Phil Conti.
It almost sounds like there was some family planning in the Binks household based on, all right, so I'm going to need a kid to help with bleeding the brakes. I'm going to need someone. All right, how many kids should we have in the family? It sounds like Dad was thinking about his own little pit crew here. So, Tommy, knowing that your interaction with this beautiful car started with Clayton Cunningham Racing, then evolved from there, seeing it now, it is not a 100-point concours going to Pebble Beach, quote, restoration. And I can't tell you how much I love and appreciate that. Because while there are some cars, vintage cars, you look at and say, of course, this should be a museum piece, share with folks how a 1980s Mazda RX-7 in IMSA GTU, whatever a workhorse is, those things were quadruple that, pounded into submission. I like the fact that you've kind of preserved what this car was really meant to do.
Well, a lot of race cars, when they're done with their pro career, they get sold to a privateer and then they get changed a little and repainted and changed a little. This one never went through that because after it was done with its real career, its factory career, it just stopped and it was almost like preserved. So the stickers on the door are the original Sebring and Daytona stickers on the door. The foil that is on the rear spoiler lip is the same foil tape that was there, and so it's just it's like it just was like Rip Van Winkle put to sleep and then brought back, and a few things bug me, like the muffler that's on it was not the muffler we ran with. It was a big kind of obscene looking thing, but this one was an early generation with a huge hook on the back.
Yeah.
And when Clayton delivered the car, he took the good one off. And,
the car wants to get out, apparently, yes.
And so little things like that. But I was looking at the switch console when I got in before my race, and I realized that some of the pieces have been changed a zillion times, but that switch console and most of those switches have been in every one of those races that car was in. That steering wheel, that window net, there's a picture of Baldwin in the car, same window net, same rivet, same, it's pretty cool.
It's pretty amazing. It didn't just fall apart.
Yeah.
And what about for you, Dan, seeing this car that you put so many hours into and that had so much success? Share with us the feelings of not just seeing it back out running quickly, obviously, as well, but the fact that if you were to close your eyes and take yourself back to 1980 whatever, you probably know the blueprint of where it all is because it's still that car.
It's kind of amazing, right? We kind of did it at the last minute trying to get this thing all ready. And I took it all apart, and there was trays of nuts and bolts and stuff. And it was actually like, okay, I know where that bolt goes, and I know where this bolt goes. And that's actually taking up room in my brain, right? Why would it still be there that I knew where this bolt went in the car? It's like, I don't know. Sometimes I wish I could forget that stuff, but other times it's cool to just take it apart and say, okay, I remember this. I remember why we did it. And then I got to remember I got to get back to work because we've run out of time. So we were definitely under the gun on this one. The truck driver said he was going to come at 11, and I think he came at 3, and literally we were just finishing it. So really cool to be able to do it. Would have been nice to have a little bit more time to do it, but like you said, a lot of these cars you walk around and you see and they're way overdone. This one's the opposite of that, so kind of cool.
Watching you climb into the car, Tommy, was fun for me. Having seen you do that originally back in the day, I don't know if you or I or Dan are as bendy and flexible as we were decades ago. Tell us about the muscle memory and the other things involved with climbing back in, firing it up, and starting to do laps at a track that you know so well. What was it like?
Well, just little things like the throttle travel is literally about an inch in that car, which is good for a guy whose ankle doesn't bend a lot, but just the way the brake pedal feel, the steering feel is unlike, and not in a good way, anything I've ever driven. At the end of this car's life, it was decidedly suboptimal, and we just dealt with it. There's actually a thing you can see on the car, on the rear fenders of the car. There's some waves, and I remember it was Mid-Ohio 87, and I was always complaining about the car being loose in the higher speed stuff, and there's just nothing else we could do. And they porta-powered in the trailer overnight. They bent the back of the car, and you can see where the top of the fenders are. When it started to bend, there's a crease in them, and they put some. and I'd never noticed those then, but I remember that story. And I looked here, and you can see those things. And so, the way you drive, there's so much play in the steering because of the steering box. You got to set it, and then if you need to go a little bit the other way, you got to go about an eighth of a turn to find tension the other way to apply it there, and then and so you're going between that free spot, and so all that stuff kind of came back, much like him with what I know what this bolt does. I know what I have to do here a little bit.
I love the chassis set up by Porta Power. That's an interesting one.
Well, that was back in the day when you could actually make changes like that you didn't have the BOP, or you didn't have
all the templates,
or the even the other teams, they didn't really care about what you did. They went and worked on their car, and we went and worked on our car, and that was just one of the things that we tried to do. We moved the wing up about a half an inch, and they never check it in tech back in those days. It was just run what you brung.
Tommy, watching the in-car stuff that we did from, I think, Friday, man, that was fun to watch. It did indeed look like you were in a 2.2 mile fist fight with the car each lap, and it was getting in some good licks on you too. Watching you come into the corkscrew opposite lock didn't look like that was intentional. It was fun. You're tapping into your inner rallycross driver, but man, not only are you hauling the mail, but you're having to manage a vehicle that if you wanted to go straight, it was choosing many other axes to work from, possibly vertical as well. Is that dance enjoyable at all now?
Yeah, it is. It's it's not comfortable at first, and so it took a while to sort of settle in. One of the places, and I asked Binks after that session, the first session, I said, does this thing have bump steer? He says, oh yeah. So you can't get it out. And so that made sense. The compression in 6, and then all the, the changes in cambered, not even the drop off, but just the bowl at the first part of the corkscrew dropping down. I mean, that was putting a bunch of inputs into the car that you don't want, and you don't see in today's car. And I mean, even if you ran that car today with the same pieces, it'd be better. You'd figure out how to engineer some of it out, but that's probably some of the coarseness is some of what's missing because it's not easy to do, and it tends to separate people.
Dan, so we see you doing your normal, again, amazing work with the Corvette racing team. Your son, Phil, the two of you have been fun rivals with him, working at Ford Chip Ganassi Racing. Know that the two of you do a lot of fun things in your private lives with cars and whatnot. What's it like to be here, turning wrenches and running a car that was, just like Tommy, really a big foundational part of your career with your son?
I think it's cool. I think he looks at that car and says, "Man, what a pile of junk," because
you were horrible back then, Dad. You put your name on this?
You actually did that? It's horrible. Compared to the cars that we work on now, that car is prehistoric. The Ford and the Corvette both are phenomenal race cars with sensors and the top quality of everything. Back then, we didn't have any money. We didn't, new brakes were a big deal. Trying to keep the engine running was a big deal. We couldn't afford to change gears because we couldn't afford the gears to change to. Now you don't even think about that. The gearbox budget that we have now would be 3 or 4 times what the whole year budget was on that RX-7.
Good Lord. Dan mentioned sensors, Tommy. I believe there's one primary. It's an analog tachometer, I think. Knowing that your driving career, especially late or 90s, 2000s, moving on, even 2010s with the Viper program, you're just blanketed with instrumentation. How much fun or how much of an adjustment is it to climb back into something where you have no expectation of plugging in anything other than the starter battery? You don't plug into this car. You are the data system. Is it fun as well, maybe tapping back into that and giving Dan whatever feedback you can to make changes?
I mean, that was one of the things, honestly, back in the day was one of the sources of anxiety when I drove this car. There was 17 gauges in that car. This one has almost all of them. There's a couple missing, but you were the data acquisition, and they wanted. And I remember thinking sometimes you're driving so hard you're not looking at the gauges, right? And I'd come in and I would have looked at the tach, and they want to know what all of them are. And so it was sort of like, okay, each session you better get a reading off every one of these gauges, and then also a lot of them they wanted read the exhaust gas temperature, the tach, and then the airbox pressure. They wanted read at the peak of 5th gear, which would be right before the brake zone here. It'd be the dip at Road Atlanta. And so, and I could get one a lap. I said, I can't get you all 5 every lap.
Right when you're praying to the Lord, we want you to also
get
document
these readings. And so, But it was important because, the water temp, these things were really sensitive on water temp. Our failures at Daytona had to do with, when it got cold at night, too cool or too lean with the, and we ended up the second year we had a mixture knob, which is why the exhaust gas temp was in there. So you were the data acquisition. And so we're not doing much in the way of debriefs. We're checking tire pressures and you just want to make sure it runs. And true to form, the only race, I crashed out at Mid-Ohio 86, and we had a DNF at Daytona. But I want to say those were the only races we DNF'd. Oh, and then Sebring we crashed out in 87 in the pits with the 962. But, in 34 races, and so that's what won us the championships, really. And it's the same thing here. This thing's run like a Swiss watch. I was worried about the oil pressure, and Binks says, you can't hurt it. Go. It's fine.
Yeah, it's going to be fine.
Tommy, let's stay on the driving aspect for a moment. Are there any races from the almost 3 dozen that you did in the car that stand out from a either personal achievement standpoint or just value?
I mean, my first win, which was here in 86, because that was big. Danny said it was good from the start. When he said his wife said, your career is over working with this kid, I was at Bob Reed was supposed to drive the car, so I was doing Daytona and Sebring, and I ran Miami in my dad's older RX-7 that they prepped, and I finished 4th, which was the best sprint finish I'd ever had in IMSA. And Binks came up to me after the race. He said, "How was I?" I said, "That was awesome." He goes, "That's not going to cut it." And I was just like, "What? Oh." And I was like, "Okay, I got to raise my game." And by the time we got to Road Atlanta, I think I ran 2nd or 3rd at Road Atlanta. We finished 2nd at Riverside. And then came here and I won. I passed Mandeville going into the corkscrew kind of midway through the race kind of thing. And so that one stands out as really kind of a real milestone. It was only at that point that Mazda committed to me for the rest of the year. And other ones that, we were up against newer, better cars. And so we had to really execute. And so places like Columbus on street courses, and these were old street courses that had barriers inside and out. Armco on, and so there was no FIA curb on the inside where you could be an inch or 2 off.
That's why you always had the porta power with you, huh, Dan?
Yeah, that's right. Running over manhole covers and all kinds of things. That back in those days, it was pretty hairy.
Yeah, and so I really got a lot better in those 2 years in terms of just running really hard, having a team that was a lot of attention and focus and pressure. So I would say probably Columbus street race, winning somewhere like that. Elkhart Lake, we had one year where there's a ton of rain. And I want to say they told me, there was one race, Charlotte, they told me not to get out at the pit stop with Bob Reed. Bob Reed was supposed to be my teammate, and Binks said to me before the race, he said, "Don't get out at the stop." I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Just don't get out." Yeah. And so I come in, and Reed's there with his helmet on to get in, and I just looked, and I just kept looking straight ahead. and
sorry about your feelings, but in those days,
was Clayton okay with that?
I think Clayton was good with it.
The quote, "Belts are stuck." Wink, wink. Nudge, nudge.
I think a lot of times back in those time frames, people were okay with finishing 4th, and we weren't. We were definitely not okay with finishing 4th. We expected to win every race, and we worked between the races as hard as we could, and we expected the driver to do the same, and that's what really gelled for all of us. If we all do this 100%, we can win most of the races, and we did.
Let's close on this, guys. So we're here, obviously, 50th anniversary of IMSA. You two are here contributing with this beautiful car. The Malibu Grand Prix livery just tickles everything that's right inside of me, having loved it and spent most of my profits as a young race car mechanic going there, pretending I'm going to be Ayrton Senna one day. So this car was monumentally important for the two of you and the careers you would go on to have. Share with us how this union between the two of you really did become something that continued and carried on for many years afterwards. I mean, that's something that I think is really amazing too. Happens to drivers all the time. Don't always get your crew chief and driver who elevate.
You want to start?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I knew from this right away that first year when I won the championship, I I brought some sponsorship that year, but I got to keep the prize money at the end of the year. I spent all of that prize money, and I bought Rolex watches. I bought myself one, and I bought 4 for all the crew guys. And I did the same for my Fire Hawk team. And then the next year when we won the title again, I did the same thing. And I knew how important they were to, not DNFing races. And I looked around even then, and that was unusual. It was more unusual then to have a perfect finishing record than it is now. And so when I signed with Chevrolet, the first thing after I got my deal done is how can I get Binks and as many of the other guys there as I could. And Binks at first didn't come. He stayed with Clayton. And then, just things that talk about serendipity. Sherry, who he would become his wife, grew up in Brighton, Michigan, and Cars and Concepts was in Brighton, Michigan. And so, getting him to go there, that was when it became clear that, there was a serious bond. And then we won GTU and Trans Am together there. And from that point on, everywhere I went, first thing I did after I got there was to try to get him to come. And by the end, it was 4 or 5 guys that were moving with me, and so I just always put a huge priority on them. I remember Jack Baldwin saying something to me, 4 or 5 years into my career where I'd had multiple. He says, "You're the luckiest guy I've ever seen." And I remember thinking, "Yeah, it's just luck. It just all happens, But things like that, and thinking about that, I obviously thought I brought a lot to the table driving wise, but I didn't want to drive for anybody else. And post career. He's always looked out for me, and I get choked up.
Yeah, me too. Funny to bring the luck thing up from Jack. That would be a comment from Jack Baldwin. I like Jack, but that's a comment that he would make. I don't believe in luck. Luck's for people that aren't prepared. All the hard work at the shop by all of the people, the truck drivers, the engine guys, all those guys, getting that car put together so a guy like Tommy can drive it and work his magic, is no different than, why do the best Formula One teams win? Why do the drag race teams? Why does John Force win? Because he wants to win and doesn't let anything get in the way. Doesn't let his feelings get in the way. Doesn't let money get in the way. He figures out some way to get the sponsorship to do the right job to win the races. And that's what we've done. And our friendship has been overwhelming. When Tommy got hurt, I probably would have quit racing. I was devastated that we'd hurt, our driver, best friend, but Tommy said, "No way, man, we're getting a new race car, and I'll be ready." And it was hard on his family, it was hard on my family, it was hard on Caroline, it was hard on all of us to go to Indianapolis and see him the deal there, and you think, wow, do I really want to do this anymore? And Tommy said, "We're doing it," and we won a lot of races after that, and I thank God that he didn't give up, because I would have, and I don't give up very well, but luckily for me, we were able to race a lot of races after that, and I had been able to win a lot of championships with the same mentality as I had when we first started working on this RX-7.
I think the coolest thing to come out of this combination of the two of you, which folks have known, it's not a secret, but race cars, exhaust fumes, champagne spraying, we know that. There's real love. There's been there's a lot of love that has driven this relationship that's produced so many things. And the fact that it can be presented in the congregation forums around an old, rusty, crusty Mazda RX-7 that kind of launched it all, I think it's a beautiful thing, guys.
It happens. I was driving by an old slab-sided Chevy truck, and I was thinking, why do things like that make you feel good? Why do you say, "Oh man, look at that thing"? And it's exactly that. It's almost it's a symbol, and it's sort of a reminder. It's like hearing a song. You see that car, and the memories come flooding back. So, which is, the car by itself, if it didn't have the history, it's like no different than, it's just an object, right? But you imbue it with all those memories and feelings and so forth. So it's pretty cool.
Thanks for spending some time, guys.
All right. Thanks for what you do.
So were we recording? Just kidding. Sorry, low humor.
Again.
No.